welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
My name is Matt.
And we are back on our mini-series of devs this week. So we are going to be covering episodes 5 and 6 for Alex Garland's new sci-fi show. I'm very excited to get back into this. I know we were on a bit of a cliffhanger last episode, Matt.
Yeah, and it's really heating up in a mire, isn't it?
Yeah, I've literally been waiting all week to chat about this again because, yeah, a lot's happened in episode 5 and 6.
Yeah, and spoiler alert for our next podcast, I'm desperate to watch the next ones already.
I mean, we've only got 2 more left after this, haven't we?
Yeah.
That's gone really quick. But yeah, I'm very excited to watch more and to chat about these 2 episodes. I mean, when I was watching episode 5, I wanted to text you immediately and talk to you about it, but I was like, no, I can't do it. I've got to wait until the podcast. So I held off. But yeah, I'm properly excited this week. Shall we just go into it?
We should, James, but we need to start on a somber tone, I think. I need to issue an important clarification. I made an error in last week's episode. I referred to Marilyn Monroe as Marilyn Manson. I can only apologise from the bottom of my heart. It's not the quality sci-fi review podcasting that our listeners tune in for. And I will endeavour to not make that mistake again. I can only explain it by the fact that I've been listening to a lot of a Kerrang early 2000s playlist on Spotify. And I think I had Marilyn Manson on the brain from that. And also there's a global pandemic and I'm very stressed out from that. So anyway, if we can move past this and get on to episode 5, that'd be great.
Don't worry, Matt. We all forgive you. I didn't even clock that you said Marilyn Manson instead of Marilyn Monroe. I totally agreed with you. But anyway, on with the show.
I take my seat on the train, and let the sun come melt my pain.
So, episode 5. This was a huge episode, right?
Yeah, really huge. Lots. It felt like so much happened in this episode.
Yeah, without giving too much away or jumping ahead, I'd happily say this is the best episode so far.
We talked about in the first few episodes how maybe they could do like a flashback episode at some point. And that's exactly what Alex Garland delivers in this one. But he does it in a really interesting way because, again, he's using the device, well, literally the device, as a device in the show to help display this flashback episode.
Yeah, so we're seeing the flashbacks through the dev's screen, but more than that, right? Because I kind of got the sense that this entire episode was a string of dev's projections. It was essentially reverse shot the entire time between Katie and the dev's screen.
Yeah, I definitely thought that as well because there's that moment, because it starts off with... Well, it's got lots of crazy sort of stylized moments in it as well, hasn't it, this episode? So obviously the machine and the sort of like cuts to Katie viewing what's happening on the screen. But also this weird thing they do. So we talked about the multiverse theory and stuff like that in the last episode, and they sort of revealed that previously. So with this, in the very first intro bit of the episode, you see Lily and Jamie and Sergey, and it's around Lily's apartment, and they're all going in different places, and it's sort of like all happening at the same time. So at that point, you're thinking, oh, it's just a sort of like a narrative device in the episode to show you Lily's past relationships and sort of like her moments with Jamie and her moments with Sergey. But then they flip it later on and they show other possible things that could have happened. So this sort of like weird stylizing is like pretty effective in that intro scene.
Yeah, it's a very stylized episode. It's the coolest looking episode, and piling on that cool aesthetic of it, we're getting all the kind of juicy gossip of all of the main characters. I like the combination of those two elements really builds it into the best episode so far for my money. So this episode's all about flashbacks. The first main kind of flashback backstory that we really get into is Kenton. We talked about Kenton a lot last week, didn't we? Because last week we talked about him interacting with that CIA Secret Service guy, whatever he was, and we wondered if Kenton had that kind of a background. That's fully confirmed, isn't it? Because he spills all the beans on his history working for the CIA.
Yeah, so when Kenton reveals his CIA background, he brings in this whole sort of revelation about working in Hong Kong. So you kind of understand his monologue that he delivered to Sergei previously about the whole communist thing that he was bringing in there. And in this, you've got the backstory for it, so you can understand it a bit more because of sort of like his previous job and what he was doing.
Yeah, and he's telling all of this to threaten Jamie. Obviously, Jamie is alive. I'm delighted about that. You were completely right. I was convinced Jamie was a goner at the end of episode 4. But you're right, Kenton's not done with him. Kenton needs to get information out of him. But I was still really tense because as that information was being extracted, I didn't know how things were going to end up for Jamie.
Yeah, that entire interrogation scene is really brutal as well. I mean, when they first go into it, it looked like something brutal had been happening, and then obviously you see Jamie's reaction in that bathtub, and he can't even get his words out. He's just so he's in a state of shock and panic at what Kenton's actually doing to him in this interrogation scene.
Yeah, but that brutality is the blunt instrument that Kenton is using. It's the brutality of what he's actually doing to Jamie. He's half drowning him. He snaps his finger. It's horrible. But he's also, backing all of that up by telling this horrible story about, well, he's quite racist, right? He hates the Chinese. He was out in Hong Kong. That's obviously very pointed at our Asian protagonists. And that's all to kind of inform the brutality and the threat that Kenton is putting on Jamie, which, thankfully, he's actually just trying to terrify Jamie. And if Jamie is sufficiently terrified, that means he gets to live and we don't lose him. And I love him. I think he's super cool, so I don't want him to die.
Yeah, he's one of the best characters, definitely. I mean, you're always rooting for Jamie when you're watching this show. You want him to get the girl. You want him to survive Kenton's interrogation. You want him to do well out of this, really.
You are a dissident. I am a tank. Do you believe me? I think you believe me. But I need to be sure.
So we found out about Kenton's previous job as a CIA operative. We also find out about some of the other characters, don't we, in these sort of backstory bits in the show. What backstories did you enjoy seeing the most and finding out about?
Well, I think for me it was mostly Kenton, but we see a lot of Forrest and Katie in their early days. I don't think that we learn a great deal about Lily, Sergei, and Jamie in this episode. I think it was all for color and to play around a little bit with that highly stylized scene in Lily's flat, where we see everything happening at once through those 3 people's histories. But it didn't reveal a great deal. I think we already knew everything we needed to know about Lily breaking up with Jamie and going off with Sergei. This is more just kind of character building in this episode. So for me, it was more Kenton confirming what a scary dude he really is, and also getting into all of that stuff with Forrest and Katie in the early days of the Devs project. What did you think of the inside of the early days of the Devs project and them meeting?
I was really pleased that they showed that bit, because in like we said, the amazing intro, which I was gushing over last time with the red, green, and blue, and the dead mouse, which we thought was like a rat. They actually explain it in this, and we were saying, oh, it would be good if they just explained it a bit. And we get all that explanation in that scene where they're operating the device. It wasn't exactly what I expected. I was kind of trying to sort of piece it together. But I found it really fascinating the way they were doing it. So what were they doing? They were scanning different objects into the machine at a quantum level.
Yeah, the original Devs machine basically was like a very high-tech microscope. They were putting stuff like an animal's skull, I think it was a rat skull, a dead rat, a sugar cube, and a little ornamental clock, and basically just doing like a 3D scan of them. But as the project was progressing, we were seeing the kind of outputs of this, and you saw that they were amazed that like they could zoom into like a molecular atomic level, and it was a perfect scan of it. And you're starting to get this picture of, oh, okay, the devs project is it's just this unbelievably detailed scan of presumably the entire universe, because we were told you'll need a computer the size of the universe to do it. And then that plays out when we see them do this whole extrapolate inwards, extrapolate outwards, and it starts to build this kind of green soupy picture of not just the dead rat, but the room around the dead rat and the machine itself and the walls, and then Forrest's face kind of emerges from that green soup with his menacing kind of stare.
So I know we've been saying that's a dead rat, but I think it's more like a dead mouse, isn't it? Just to be pedantic about it, because I'm sure there's people listening to us who are just like, it's not a rat, it's a mouse. It's a dead rodent, either way. The fact it's dead as well, that I think is really important, because they want to, because you see this experiment again in the next episode, and it's almost as if they're trying to see if they can make it so they can see the mouse alive again, but not go back in the past. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but I think there's some sort of link between that and obviously Forrest wanting to obviously resurrect his dead daughter in some way. So I don't know if that's going to come into play as the series goes on.
Well, we get a little bit more clarification on that when the episode goes on, and there's a bit of back and forth between flashbacks at different stages. And we're going to kind of come back to the nature of the devs project again a little bit later in the episode. But in between, we're going to see the actual crash where Forrest's daughter Amaya died.
But going a bit back again with the backstory stuff and the relationships with Lily and Sergei, I really like those moments, you know, the moments where you see them together and you get a bit more of an idea about what Sergei was like, because he seemed like a very brief character. I mean, he was in one episode, got killed off, that was the end of him. So we don't really know why Lily has that kind of, we don't know much about her relationship with Sergei. So seeing her meeting him straight after she'd broken up with Jamie was good, because obviously we know about their relationship more. So it kind of like lent itself to that a bit. But one of the sort of like the little funny Easter egg bits, which I quite enjoyed, was the film that they were watching. So there's a moment when Sergei and Lily are sat watching a film, and apparently it's The Third Man. Now, do you know what happens in that film?
Don't think I do. I think I've seen that. Is that an Orson Welles film? I didn't recognise they were watching that. It's a spy movie, isn't it?
And the main plot in that is a man's investigating his friend's death and uncovers a load of corruption.
No, I completely missed that. I didn't catch that. I think I've seen it, but quite a long time ago, and not, you know, long enough ago that I just didn't recognise what was on the screen at all. So that was a good catch. Well spotted, James. And is that the film that they're watching together when Sergei tells Lily that he loves her for the first time?
Yeah, I think that's the one. That's the moment.
I thought that was an interesting moment, because he says it in such a way that's like it's something that's been weighing on him, and it's really difficult for him to say, which is not how that should feel when you tell someone for the first time that you love them. So that's really interesting that he was watching a film about a double agent spy, and then he chose to pause that and tell this girl that he loved her.
Ah, yeah, I didn't think about it like that, because obviously he's watching that with full knowledge of what he's actually doing at Amaya. So that adds a whole other layer to it. Oh, that's brilliant.
And I think it's an important character moment for him, because I think in these flashbacks you do see that Sergei, like Sergei's handler said, Sergei really loved Lily. You know, he was lying and he didn't tell her everything about himself, but his feelings were honest. And he comes across that way when he meets her in the cafe. He's very, you know, we know he's a spy, but he's not being a spy in that moment. He's meeting a girl and just chatting to her about a breakup. And then, yeah, to have that moment of telling her that while watching a film about his big secret, it adds a bit of colour to him, and it makes him a more likeable character. He's not, you know, I think Lily's really mad at him at this point in the plot, but we're seeing confirmation of what his handler said, basically, that his feelings for Lily were true.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice little touch. They could have just negated all of that and just glossed over it, but I think going back and just adding those little elements kind of like cements that sort of plot point a bit more. But the other backstory I quite liked was the stuff you found out about Katie. I really enjoyed that scene where she was in the lecture room and obviously she meets Forrest for the first time. A lot of what they were talking about went straight over my head because they're talking like really hardcore physics and stuff like that and different theories. But I did look up the Everett interpretation, like the Everett principle. See, I can't even remember it right.
The Everett interpretation, which you didn't even mention.
Everett, whose interpretation states that there is no change to the superposition of the humble quantum particle. Rather, there is a change to the entire universe.
It states that the macroscopic superposition exists.
And just so we're all clear what that means, it means the universe is constantly splitting, like the trunk and branches and twigs of an infinitely large tree. And on that tree, all possible worlds will exist.
It's how you view time as a many-branched tree wherein every possible quantum outcome is realized. And I think that is essential in understanding what the hell is going on in this show. And yeah, so they say that, and then directly afterwards, they have another one of these stylized scenes where we see Katie, and then Katie goes off in one direction, and then she does something slightly different, and it goes to this point, and these are all the possible outcomes. This is what could have happened if things were slightly different. A bit like sliding doors.
Yeah, it's a sliding doors moment. Yeah,
exactly. So in that film, it's what happened if she didn't go through that door, whatever it was, and then her whole life changes. So I thought that was quite a nice touch to put in after that lecture moment.
So this Everett principle seems to be very important for the overall plot of Devs, but isn't it the mention of the Everett principle? Is that what gets Katie really wound up and upset? Doesn't she hate it?
I thought she mentioned the Everett principle.
Oh, she's the one who brings it up and she actually believes in it. Okay. And what was the other stuff? Was it the theory that things can have a superposition and be in more than one place at once?
Yeah, and it was the thing where she said, like, if you're looking at certain quantum particles or something under a microscope, you can look again, they change because you're looking at them. So that would be sort of like the idea that if you know something's going to happen, you can change it because you know it. Whereas Katie's thinking in a determinist way that everything that happens is already like will happen or can happen. I think I'm probably not explaining this right.
I get what you mean, but then why is... Well, we know why Forrest is anti many worlds. It's because he wants his Amaya back, or he wants to see the truth of his Amaya's history. But does he believe that the many worlds theory is true? He's just not interested in those other worlds.
So Forrest doesn't want to admit that the many worlds theory is true, because if he does, then there could have been a scenario where his daughter would be alive. And it also proves that it was his fault that she died because of what he did at the time. And that's kind of revealed in when we find out how Amaya died. And we also find out that Forrest had a wife, which I mean is logical, seeing as he had a daughter.
Hang on, back up a little bit. I'm not sure I agree with you. I think he does believe in the many worlds principle. It's just not what he wants to get out of Devs. Because if the many worlds principle is true, that's still in line with his view of a deterministic universe. It's just that every possible outcome exists in separate individual deterministic universes. So there is a universe where Amaya survived, possibly because of something he did, but that's unchangeable in that universe, just as Amaya's death is unchangeable in this universe. So I think the many worlds idea does fit with what he wants out of Devs. It will absolve him of any guilt he's placed on himself. It's just not useful to him because he wants to just watch a video of Amaya? Is that what he wants out of the actual Devs project, right? He was very clear about it. He got rid of Lyndon. He was really upset about the many worlds thing. He wants his Amaya, but the existence of the many worlds, I think, does gel with his deterministic view. But there's also a thing here, and maybe we'll get into it more when we talk about episode 6, about what his intentions were versus what devs can do. And maybe it's just a case of, I mean, maybe, yeah, he just wants to look back, but he's stumbled into this whole future prediction thing. I don't think so. I don't know.
I think he knows more of what's going on. Well, we should probably talk about Amaya's death as well. So we find out it was a car accident. And what's more is you find out that it was because he was phoning his wife at the time, talking to her on the phone, that she wasn't paying attention and she crossed at an intersection and then gets slammed into by another car, and then they both die.
That's so interesting to me that that's how you describe that scene, because you're describing a scene where Forrest is rightly feeling guilty because you've just described a situation where he did cause Amaya's death, and that is not how I thought it happened. I did sort of consider that there was a bit of distraction going on to his wife driving, but as I saw the scene play out, I was really surprised to see a scene that I didn't really think Forrest was responsible. They got absolutely T-boned by another car. I was completely putting the blame on the other driver when I saw it, and I was really surprised because I was expecting a car crash or something like that with Forrest at the wheel. Something you would really like, it would really weigh on your conscience afterwards. But when I saw it, I was like, oh, that didn't seem totally like his fault. So is he just obsessed with, the possibility of things he could do wrong? But the reason it's so interesting that you read it that way is, I mean, that's what's going on in that world and in Forrest's head. He didn't do anything illegal. I think it's probably even illegal to talk on your phone in America in the car. So no one broke the law, maybe. It was just an accident. But he is going to sit there and replay that forever and be like, should I have been on the phone to her? Was she distracted? Is it my fault? It's that sort of, there is a grey area to it in terms of his responsibility.
Yeah. And it's interesting because straight after that, they show all the different scenarios that could have happened in this multiverse theory. So you see, like in most of the others, they're fine. Like they get clipped, but they're still okay. There's only one scenario that you see, which is the actual scenario that happened, that they both get killed.
Oh, I completely missed that. So you're saying that all the cars we see that seem to almost hit Forrest, that's a replay of the two cars involved in the accident. I kind of misread that scene. I thought that was like an ongoing pile-up around because Forrest is walking through.
No, because you see that and you see, like, you're focusing on him, but you also see him in the other shots.
Yeah.
So again, it's this whole sort of like branching out of what could possibly happen.
Yeah. So we've seen it 3 times. I think they only do it 3 times. It's this stylistic choice. And we've got a nice progression of it because the first time we saw it, it wasn't a multiple universe thing. It was just showing us different parts of Lily's history all at once. And now we've seen it used twice to visually illustrate a multiverse. I want to come back to what we were saying about the overall format of the episode with Katie watching this. Even though I misread that the ongoing crash is obviously there's the one that you mentioned, which is that his wife pulls up and it's very obviously what could have been. That for me left a bit of a question mark over what we were watching and what is Katie watching. So are we still in a dev's projection when we see alternate timelines, or is that just an artistic choice for the TV show?
That's a really good point, because previously Forrest did mention that if you keep watching the images, there'll be little discrepancies every time, so you'll see something slightly different. So it could be that Katie was watching all these different scenarios and what could have happened. I mean, that would be a really interesting extra layer to it.
That does imply that Devs has gone slightly haywire at this point because, Forrest has been very explicit about what he does and doesn't want the Devs projection to do. So presenting a load of multiple realities all overlaid over each other, I think that's not what Forrest wants, and that seems a bit of a problem. But I kind of thought that was what was happening, because by the end of the episode, I think all of the transitions from scene to scene were the beanbag texture, the devs static.
Yeah, the blizzard kind of thing.
Yeah, which for me, and I'm talking about even like going into establishing shots and stuff, like shots of the city had that effect transitioning them. So for me, it really strongly implied that the whole episode was presented as just a simple shot reverse shot. You're either looking at Katie's face or you're looking at the dev's screen, which means that those other scenes were, some kind of faulty projection with multiple realities.
We haven't talked about Lily's other flashbacks, really. So the ones with her dad. What did you think about those ones? Because I don't feel like they added too much to it, but there was one line that her dad said to her about no man stands in the same river twice. And that sort of lent itself to this sort of like multiverse, multi-world idea, didn't it? Because at times constantly moving and you're changing and things are changing. And this proverb kind of like worked its way into the themes of the episode, didn't it?
Yeah, almost too much though, right? Because like, what did he mean by it? He didn't mean you'll understand one day when you encounter a shady tech cult who are developing a multi-worlds viewing machine. What did he mean?
Yeah, exactly. And then the only other bits you saw were her playing chess, or what? It wasn't chess. It was like Chinese checkers.
No, I don't think that's Chinese checkers, or it might be. I'm not sure. But yeah, some strategic board game that kind of it builds up a little bit on what we already know about Lily. Her ability to just do the Fibonacci sequence like straight off the bat, and her cryptography skills that we already know about her. She's got this strategic way of looking at the world, and that comes into play in the next episode as well. We do see a few other key things in terms of the overall like mystery of the show. Towards the end of the episode, we do see another version of Lily's death projection. So I've got to kind of eat my words on this, because I was convinced that we weren't going to kill off the main character, and then it must be Lyndon, because Lyndon looks enough like Lily in static to be a body double. But we've now applied the Lyndon's clarity algorithm, and it's definitely Lily, isn't it? And it looks like it's the same video playing again.
Yeah, it definitely looks like the same video, doesn't it? And we do get a clearer picture of where she is as well.
Wow, yeah. She's on a metal, golden, dappled floor. Where could she be, James?
I mean, she's in the Devs project, isn't she? And there's an earthquake, like we said, and it's all going to happen there. Well, I'm still back on the earthquake. I don't know if there's going to be an earthquake, but there's going to be a catastrophe. I mean, the next episode says a bit more about that.
So where does this end? I think we jumped ahead a little bit talking about the Lily death projection, because there's also the scene where we see Kenton talking to Forrest and Katie and basically threatening them. We were talking in the last episode about like what kind of guy is Kenton? Is he part of this cult, or is he just like a hired gun? I feel like we're getting our answer in this episode, right?
Yeah, he's got no loyalty to them. He says that in that speech, doesn't he? He says, I'm not going to jail for you, just so you know. Like, if there's a way to get out of jail, I'm going to do it, even if it's throwing you under the bus. Yeah,
and then he makes it clear that he's worried about Lily. He says this Lily girl, she's a threat. And Katie's got this really, I don't know, it felt really mysterious, but I guess it kind of fits in with what we know. She says, how did she phrase it? I think she says, it's not within your power to kill Lily. And then she repeats herself. She clarifies, you could kill her. I know you can kill her, but it's not within your power.
Yeah, because Katie's slowly becoming the person who's in control. I mean, in this episode, she's the one who's watching all of what's going to happen and what has happened. So she has that extra layer of knowledge about the events which are going to happen and what's happened before them. So I feel like she's slowly becoming the number one over Forrest. And that definitely happens in the next episode.
I think that brings us nicely into episode 6, doesn't it?
Guinevere had yours, lady like yours.
So episode 6, this was the relationship episode. At least it was to me. There's lots of relationship stuff going on.
There is a lot of that. I felt like I was going into a showdown episode. And it kind of is, but it's a very muted showdown.
Yeah, but I feel like as the episode went on as well, it manipulates your views on the characters, because there were moments in this episode where I thought Forrest was an okay guy. Didn't think he was too bad. I mean, he's playing Frisbee with Jamie at one point, and he's sort of giving him all this sort of like nice advice and saying how he thinks he's a stand-up guy and all of this stuff. But then previously we saw Sergei being killed, and then Forrest was probably saying something not too dissimilar to what he's said in the past, about sort of like, you can't change things, they are the way they are, deterministic views, yet it seemed more menacing. And then in this episode, he says basically, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. And it was a weird sort of switch for me, seeing Forrest like that.
I do know what you mean, and I agree, and I felt those things for Forrest in this episode, but it all kind of feeds into his cult leader persona, which is he is very magnetic and charismatic and likable, fundamentally likable, but he's saying all the same things that make him fundamentally likable, whether he's having a man murdered on the floor or having this heart-to-heart chat with a man whose finger he just had broken. You know, he's playing that off like, oh, I didn't know, but like, you know, you've orchestrated all of this. You are in control. You broke his finger as much as Kenton did.
You've seen Kenton kill someone right in front of you. You know what he's capable of. You know the kind of things he's going to do.
Yeah, so the wincing when Jamie explains your attack dog snapped my finger, he kind of winces, and he looks genuinely remorseful. And I think he does feel some remorse, but it's more like he's feeling remorse about the fact that he has to do these awful things, rather than remorse that the thing is happening.
Yeah, he really sort of like does play that remorse card, doesn't he? He tries to make Jamie look at him in a different light, even though he's fully aware of everything that him and the company have been up to, because he's been with Lily this whole time, and he's seen the video of Sergei being killed. Like, we've seen the video of Sergei's body being lit on fire, so he knows what's going on, even if Forrest is trying to be all nice and you do the sort of small talk thing with him.
Yeah, I think Nick Offerman and Alex Garland have done such a good job of making him such an interesting character that really draws you in, so that you do constantly feel that tension of wanting to like him, and you find him interesting, as does the world that Devs is set in. But you can't reconcile that with the awful things that we've seen him do. And they've been doing that throughout the series, but it really ramps up with the tenderness, I guess, that he's expressing to other characters in this episode, to Katie, to Jamie, indirectly to Lily, the way he talks about her.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to watch, but constantly you're reminded of that sort of menacing nature of Forrest. I mean, when we get the return of Lyndon, and you see Stuart's digs, so he lives in a mobile home. Did you expect that of Stuart?
No, but it felt right when I saw it.
Yeah, because he's kind of sort of like the free and easy guy, which I think is why he's such a, like, him and Lyndon's relationship so funny to watch. But yeah, so Lyndon makes a comeback, and he has a conversation with Stuart about, he's basically saying, I want back in on the Devs project. And during that, I was thinking, okay, maybe Matt was right. Lyndon is going to get killed. Something like that's going to happen. He's back. He wants some more, but he knows things aren't going to go to plan.
Yeah, that was quite a strange one, because that conversation was, I don't know, it felt like it was a really important conversation. I know we've got 2 episodes left, so we're going to come back to those characters at some point, but we spent like the first chunk of the episode with them, and then basically the rest of the episode with Lily and what she's doing.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of a precursor to something in the next few episodes. You can see that coming.
Also, Stuart's got a mate that appears to be a homeless guy that lives or was just sitting next to his caravan, and they're obviously friendly because they greet each other. I thought that was really interesting because, you know, we've mentioned a couple of times the guy that hangs out on the step outside Lily's flat and how we think he's going to be important. That kind of changed my opinion on whether he was going to be important or not. It was just interesting to see that there was another homeless character who's mates with one of the main characters. It seems less like, oh, we're teeing up a really important moment, and more just a comment, I think, on, I don't know, how you treat homeless people.
I suppose that is quite a good thing to have in the background of this, because it's a show about potential multi-worlds and multiverses. And it's kind of like, what would happen to these people in different circumstances? So would they be homeless on the street, or would they be living a whole different life if something different had happened? Like there had been a different sort of outcome, if there hadn't been these tram lines in place.
Yeah, doesn't he make a comment about that when he's talking about a corporate job in like the first or second episode? He's like, yeah, I used to live in that world.
Yeah, I think he does, doesn't he? It's really brief, but I do sort of vaguely remember something like that. If not, that would definitely work.
Let's say it did.
Let's say it did. So after we see Lyndon and Stuart together again, we see this experiment really briefly with Katie. And you see the dead mouse again. And then you see a live mouse on a screen. Now, I don't know if that's her bringing the mouse back in some way, but it was a weird cut. It was really brief, but there was something going on. So I don't know what's going to happen there.
Oh yeah, I think it was implying something about the way Devs traces its projection back, because that implies that like the mouse would have died by just walking around being normal and then keeling over dead, and then you can play that in reverse and it just stands up. So I don't know. Again, it's like it doesn't quite gel with what I thought was going on. You know, Devs can't bring mice back from the dead, can it?
But we've already seen bits where they sort of drop stuff in and then they refer back to them in the next few bits. So I don't know if I think there must be going back to that at some point for some sort of explainer. But I found that quite interesting. But that's followed by a big reveal, like shortly after. So Lily and Jamie go to Forrest's house and you see Forrest in bed and he talks to someone.
Well, I guess importantly, we didn't actually mention it. Jamie's rescued Lily from the hospital/prison.
From the madhouse.
Yeah, he's once again, you know, the hero of the day.
Yeah, and also going back to the previous episode, when Katie sees that on the projection, she smiles. So she obviously wants that to happen, which I thought was sort of an interesting bit. Or she's like happy about it in some way.
Happy in so much that it confirms her deterministic view of the world, right? Like, Katie's not, I don't know, she's not happy one way or the other with how things play out. She's happy that all her theories about the universe are being confirmed by events transpiring the way Dev said they would.
Yeah, so it's more that she's being proven right because Lily has to get out of that place in order to be where she ends up in that projection of the future. So Lily's out, Jamie's with her, they go to Forrest's house, Forrest has someone in his bed. Who could it be? It's Katie. Katie has been sleeping with the boss. Did you see that as like a big reveal, or were you just like, kind of saw it kind of as a possibility?
It wasn't a big surprise to me. It felt quite gross, though. It felt really inappropriate. It also like really backed up this cult leader persona. And we talked about, I think we were talking in the last episode about how Katie is being built up as this number two. And we've just said that she's more than just the number two. She's like the man, the woman behind the man. And now she's in his bed, she's in his house. But it felt exactly the same way that like a cult leader there'll often be like a sexual element to a cult. And you kind of, you know, the leader will sort of draw people in, and the girls who are like most bought into the ideas end up sleeping with them, and then it's like, well, what did you really want from your cult? Was it because you think the world's ending, or did you just want to sleep with someone?
Interesting point. Very interesting point.
So they have this showdown, and I said it was a muted showdown, but I still thought it was really amazing because there was just a quiet layer of tension underneath the whole, the majority of this episode. Like loads of this episode, a significant portion of this episode is just two conversations, right? It's Lily and Katie having a open and honest Q&A session, and Forrest and Jamie having their weird, male bonding experience that they're having on the stoop.
Yeah, that's so strange. And then playing Frisbee as well.
Yeah. They're quite good at it, though. There was plenty of shots where, enough passes were made. I tried to play Frisbee with my girlfriend the other day on the heath, and we weren't that good.
Obviously harder than it looks. But that reminds me as well. So like in the intro sequence of this one, so he was playing Frisbee with Amaya. And did you clock the weird sort of like, it was like almost like a Midsummer moment when Forrest is covered in flowers. It just made me think of that. I don't know what the relevance was, but it just made me laugh a bit because I was just thinking of Midsummer when that was happening.
I thought it was interesting because I was still I was still a bit coming off the mindset of thinking all flashbacks were a Devs projection, and that was so stylized. That was like, no, that didn't really happen. That's something in Forrest's memory. That's him perceiving himself, playing with his child or whatever. So it took us out of that mode, I think, that we were in the last episode. Let's talk about the Q&A between Katie and Lily. It's a huge moment for Lily, but initially we don't find out anything we didn't already know. And I think throughout the conversation we don't find out loads that we didn't already get a sense of from the previous episode, did we?
Yeah, I think you definitely got a sense of everything that she's saying. But I feel like she goes into more explicit detail about it because the way she explains it she explains it in layman's terms so that I can understand it, which is better. So the way she's talking about sort of like the atomic structure of a pen, and then if you scan all of that, so you know how heavy it is and the weight of it, and you can sort of like work out if you push it, the trajectory and all this kind of stuff. And that kind of made more sense to me when they were talking about it. And the way that they've, like the Dev's computer, how it can see backwards and forwards because of everything that's in there, all of that sort of like information. And then the reasoning for that being that everything happens for a reason. There is always a reason behind anything. There's something that happens. So if somebody they use the example of a child gets leukemia, the reason for that is like an abnormality in their DNA. Or lightning strikes. It's not a random event, it's a static discharge. So there's no random events in the world. There's always something that has made that happen. So everything happens for a reason. So I quite liked the way they explained all of that. It kind of made sense to me.
Take a computer. Give it all the data that can exist about this pen rolling across the table. Its trajectory, velocity, mass of its component parts, atomic structure. What can the computer now tell you? It can tell you how hard the pen was pushed, and it can tell you when the pen will stop rolling. The computer can see backwards. The computer can see forwards. Now do that with everything.
It did make sense to me. It's still a big leap of faith and suspension of disbelief to take it to the next level. Like the question I kind of came away with, and I didn't want to overthink it, but it was what's the input of data into devs? What's the time frame of the input of data into devs? So let's say it's been running for 6 months. You switched it on with the dead mouse, and it built its projection around the room, around the dead mouse, and then it just expanded. And we're saying that it expanded to fill the entire universe. But with what? Presumably with the present, what's happening at that time in the universe. And then you continue to input the present, and it's tracing back from the present. I got a bit lost in thinking about that in terms of what was the input of data into devs.
Yeah, I feel like the science is probably a little bit off there in some ways. But it kind of like, I can still sort of like picture it. For me, I can picture that more because if it is like you work out everything that's now, and then by doing that, you can trace it back. I can get that part, and then you can also predict the way it will be afterwards because there's certain things which will happen because of this, and then yeah, to me that sort of makes sense. It makes the science make sense in my unscientific head.
Yeah, the pen analogy helps that, doesn't it? Because you're inputting all of that present time data into the machine, and it's just calculating the forces applied to everything and tracing back. And the pen analogy of why did the pen roll forward is helpful to just keep you on track, I guess, with understanding that, right?
Exactly. And then then Katie explains that the further back you go or the further forward you go, it would get fuzzier. And then she drops the bomb that there's a moment in time which at this point is going to happen in like, a few hours? It's within the next day?
21 hours at the time of their conversation.
So 21 hours time, there is a moment that they can't look any further forward past. So they've been able to look forward in time up to this point since they got the devs project working. But now there is a moment where something's happened. There's a point of pure static and the future will be lost after that night. And they don't know exactly why or what the cause is, but for some reason, there's a breakdown of cause and effect and the laws of the universe happening at this point. I mean, I don't know what the hell that is, but to me, that's a cataclysmic event that happens in devs with a great big earthquake.
Yeah, I came back to the earthquake as well, but it feels too simple at this point, right? Because I think it's just a very simple, logical guess that in 21 hours, devs gets destroyed, and that's why devs can't read any further. But that's a bit too time travel-y, right? Like the time travel machine can't exist unless it exists in the time, where it's got to go or look to.
I wasn't thinking like that. I was thinking my sort of idea was maybe that reality won't be a reality, and then it will switch into a different reality. It's like this whole multi-world idea. So then if this all ends, there's another world where everything's ending fine and this goes a completely different way. I don't know if that's exactly it, but I feel like there'll be some sort of switch. I think the multi-worlds, multiverse idea will come into play with this. And it's just what can happen.
Well, I think if you sort of follow the plot and everything they talk about in terms of, there's a big conversation about free will in this episode that they have. And if you're trying to keep to that, then the only thing that can happen that breaks those fundamental laws of the universe as Katie and Forrest understand them is that someone contravenes, is that the right word? Someone counteracts what was supposed to happen. Someone makes a free will decision that overrides the deterministic nature of the universe. That would be something cataclysmically devastating to their understanding of the universe. So potentially something like that. She goes into devs and she does something that devs didn't predict she was going to do.
Yeah, because Lily's got to be the person who does that, surely, because she's our protagonist. She's the person we've been following. Everybody is constantly saying how great she is. And there's a moment at the end of this where literally Forrest and Katie are in bed talking about how great Lily is. They're saying she's so strong, she's so great, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, so it's all pointing towards her being some sort of, I don't know, godly figure almost in what she's going to do in the next few episodes. She's going to do something that will change the course of what they're theorizing at the moment.
Yeah, and again now we've introduced this concept of a countdown to apocalypse. Again, it feeds into this whole cult leader mentality, because that's another thing that cult leaders do, is they suck people in by saying the end of the world is coming and I'm the guy who knows all about it. Come on and join me and have sex with me. We'll face the end of the world together. I felt like in this episode they were never more like a cult, and I think Lily even calls them a weird tech cult at one point.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she said that as well, because when she said it, I was like, that's exactly what Matt's been saying this whole time.
But following along that line of thinking, are you and I, prepared for the possibility that Devs simply doesn't work? So I feel like, Lily throws that into the mix. She storms out of there. She says, you're crazy. And she doesn't want anything to do with them, although I think she's going to change her mind on that in the next episode. But she throws that idea into the mix. We've also got this portrait of a cult, a doomsday cult that believes the end of the world is coming now in 21 hours. Now, in real life, when someone forms a cult and says the world is going to end at this time, come and have sex with me, they are invariably proven wrong. The world does not end. They were talking out their arse. Best case scenario, they're going to recalculate and say, it's actually in 3 years' time. Worst case scenario, they're going to get all of their followers to kill themselves. So there's two possibilities. Well, there's many possibilities, obviously, but I just feel like as sci-fi fans, we're watching this and we're primed to accept that the supercomputer device in the sci-fi TV show just works because it's a sci-fi TV show. Are you prepared for the possibility that Devs is total bullshit and it's just a weird computer they've invented, or that it just doesn't work the way they think it does and they've got it all wrong?
I mean, I don't know if I'm fully prepared for that. I've got to be honest. Yeah, that's a really good point, because you do view it in that sort of sci-fi way. But again, this show's thrown in so many other things. It's had the spy element. It's thrown in those bits. And I think also it's important to think about what Lyndon says in this episode, because he says, look, Forrest isn't like a tech guru. He isn't this sort of like great engineer. He's an entrepreneur. So he's not that guy you think he is. He's not the guy in the know. He's just there generating the money and making a business.
Yeah, Stuart's a little bit bought into the company line or the cult line. He calls him like, they're talking about the rules of the universe, and Stuart's like, the rules of the universe are secondary to a tech genius. He's really like on board with Forrest's mystique, and Lyndon totally cuts through that. Like you said, yeah, he just says, no, he's an entrepreneur. He's not a genius.
Yeah, and also because Lyndon is like, as you'd imagine, a bit bitter, because he's the person who's fixed his shit. He's the one who fixed Forrest's machine, at least in his eyes. And what did he get for doing it? He got fired and might potentially get killed if he goes back to Devs.
Yeah, he's the person who's left the cult and sees it for what it is. I'm totally on board with the cult thing. I think there's so much stuff thrown in to make you think about real world cults and how they're run, that's what made me turn a bit of a corner on where it's going to go. But I've been very wrong about some of the guesses that I've made.
Also, with sort of like, there must be certain schools of science which get a bit culty, because if you think there's all these different theories and everybody has their own theory, and if somebody disagrees with their theory, then they're like, there's this sort of like conflict there. So I don't know if that comes into play at all, because there's that moment in the lecture hall when Katie is having that argument with the lecturer. She's saying, no, you're stupid. This is not how it is. It should be like this. And you're getting all these different conflicting views on science in this, but also conflicting views of what the world's supposed to be like and what is free will. So you're getting this sort of clash, and it's really well displayed throughout the entire show.
How does it end then? All of those tense, deep conversations, and then they leave. I did really like the moment where they stopped playing Frisbee, because we talked about what a sweet moment it was kind of becoming, the Frisbee game. The way that Jamie kind of snaps out of the trance as soon as Lily comes out of the house. I was expecting him to throw the Frisbee back to Forrest and then leave, but he drops it on the floor like he's really afraid. He's suddenly like aware of where he is, who he's talking to, and he just puts it straight down and like walks away.
Yeah, and it is like a trance, isn't it? Because he looks a little bit sheepish about having just played Frisbee with Forrest. Because Lily looks at him like, what the fuck are you guys doing? You're out here playing Frisbee with the guy who potentially killed my ex-boyfriend. What the fuck is going on?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great moment. They drive off, and then immediately afterwards, we get what I thought was both the funniest moment in the whole series and also the worst by far moment in the whole series. We get like a reveal of Kenton sitting in his car. And at first I thought Kenton was just like, you know, Forrest had asked him to be there to keep an eye on the situation. And I guess because I thought that, we then have to have a moment where Kenton explains exactly why he's there and says out loud, I don't know, when characters just say out loud what they're thinking to no one, to an empty room, it kind of always looks pretty terrible.
Because what does he say? He says something like, oh, you're all friends now or something. Like, I see how it is. And I'm like, oh, you're right. They didn't need that bit of dialogue. You kind of knew what was happening. You could have said it without the words.
Yeah, I guess to be fair, you did need something because, like I said, I thought that he was, you know, working for Forrest. You needed a little something just to let you know Forrest doesn't actually know Kenton's there. Kenton is now out for himself because, again, I'm too dumb to follow what's actually going on. But the way they did it, oh man, it was so clunky.
Sneaky Kenton just watching them all from his car.
You're meddling kids. So Jamie and Lily then go home, and what did you make of their like tender moment in the flat as they get ready for bed?
It was not tender. It was not a tender moment. It was, so Lily basically says, you should come sleep in my bed. And Jamie's a bit like, what? No, I'm all right. I'll just sleep here. It's fine. But then she says, no, you should come and sleep in my bed. And it's kind of like, oh, is that nice? They're having like a moment. And then she immediately follows that with like, my ex-boyfriend, blah, 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 blah. So she's talking about her ex and how she didn't know him. And then asking like Jamie to go to bed with her. So it's just a bit weird. It's not exactly the best kind of pillow talk, is it?
Yeah, I agree with you. It wasn't tender. I was just trying to rile you up there. It was pretty horrible. It made me feel really uncomfortable. It just made me feel really bad for Jamie because she's sort of essentially pouring her heart out to Jamie, but she does it in a way that it doesn't change the circumstances of the breakup for Jamie. Like, she left him for this guy, and now she's saying, oh, I didn't know him at all. Well, she didn't actually leave him for that guy, did she? Because we got the flashback in the last episode that showed that it was a clean break, you know? They met independently. But she's laying it out in this way, like, oh, I made a mistake by being with him because he wasn't the guy I thought he was. But from Jamie's point of view, it's like, I don't give a shit. Like, you still completely broke my heart. You feel bad about it now. That doesn't change the circumstances of what happened.
But he's like so smitten with her. Like, she could say anything to him and he'd jump. He's like a little puppy dog, isn't he? And I'm pretty sure that's what Kenton calls him a few times.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was bound to happen at some point. It just wasn't that kind of like moment that you might have wanted it to be. But I don't think it was ever going to be that kind of moment with those two because there's so much other stuff going on.
No, and I think that's a good point because it might undermine the journey that they're going on a little bit to have actual romance happening between the two of them, because it's not romantic what happens. It's, you know, they go to each other for some comfort maybe, but there's no romance there.
The Katie and Forrest bit that they cut to, they're sort of like saying, this could be, well, this is the last few hours we're ever going to have, so kind of make the most of it. And then that's exactly kind of what Lily and Jamie are doing without really realising it, because they're not completely bought into this whole idea that the world's going to end, but it is that kind of like cut between. Yeah,
and they're still afraid for their lives. If they're not bought into the world ending, then they're still convinced that they are at the mercy of this all-powerful psychopath who could have them killed. So that about brings us to the end of episode 6 and episode 5, the best 2 episodes so far. It's been ramping up so much. I've been really enjoying it. How are you feeling? We got 1 more of these podcasts to go and 2 more episodes of Devs.
I'm excited, but then after you saying the machine might not work, what are you going to do? Now I'm worried about that. And if it's all just rubbish and this whole thing is just like nothing's going to happen, are they going to do a Lost and just make up some bullshit at the end? I mean, surely not.
No, it's not. Not a Lost situation. But James, I've been wrong about so many things. I think it's quite fun to speculate because we're friends here. It's a friendly environment. We can come out with some stupid shit. So don't you worry. I'm almost certainly completely wrong. So everybody, tune in next week to find out how wrong I was when we wrap up this mini-series and cover episodes 7 and 8 of Alex Garland Devs.
Yes, and as always, if you want to get in touch, you can get us on the social medias. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We've got a website, which is www.journeythroughsci-fi.com. So reach out, get in touch. And also, if you go onto iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a lovely review, we would really greatly appreciate it, because the more reviews and stuff like that we get, the more we can get more listeners and the more podcast episodes we can give to all of you lovely lot.
Thanks as always for listening. We will be back with you soon for more Journey Through Sci-Fi.